Hello everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I'm going to be sharing my brand new writing process. So I've made a writing process video in the past, which I will link to down below, and the beautiful thing about a process is that it's right in the word. Processes can evolve and they can change, and really every time you write a book, you're learning how to write that book. And I've come to realize recently that my writing process has definitely evolved now that I have moved into writing a new genre. I basically have a specific writing process for writing thrillers. If you watched my vlog series of writing a thriller for the first time, you are gonna know some of this, how it kind of started and where it ended up, how it all turned out. And I'm delighted to say, so I finished that book, I finished revising it, and I've started a new book, another thriller that came to me in very much a similar way to the last one. And so I think I've unlocked my new writing process, and I wanted to share it and talk about it in case it might help you write any old book, but specifically and especially if you are trying to write any kind of suspense fiction, thriller, mystery, this new process I'm using might help. Now, a disclaimer, don't worry, I have not given up on my diehard pantsing ways, but my pantsing is evolving, and really it's easiest to say, hey, I'm a pantser, but I'm a discovery writer at heart. It's a lot of headlights writing for me, and I know a decent amount about the book before I start writing. I'm not a know-nothing writer, so this is just my writing process kind of evolving. It's still discovery writing, but my signposts are very different when I write a thriller. So what's really changed is where I start. In the past, I've always found my story through character, meaning I've started with a character arc. I know my character arcs before I start, and in that sense, it might sound more plotty than pantsy when I have talked about my writing process in the past, because I know where my characters are here, I know this arc, I know a lot of the twists and turns that happen to the characters, and they would be anchored in emotional turning points. So I had emotional turning points in mind, including for the end. But that didn't always mean I knew the plot. And for my first 4 books, which were speculative fiction, which were genre fiction, sci-fi, urban fantasy, and then 2 sci-fis that were also retellings, I got to about the 60% mark in my book and had a light bulb moment and figured out something really essential. Happened in a bigger way for the 2 published books, so Brightly Burning and The Stars We Steal, but even my first 2 unpublished books definitely had moments closer to the middle where I unlocked something about the whole book, and I ended up fixing a lot in revision, plot-wise. Thrillers are completely different. So I don't start with character for my thrillers. I start with a plot twist. I have to start with the murder, essentially. I start with, wouldn't it be cool if, and it's always some crazy motive. I start with motive, not even the killer, not even who died. I start with motive. Thing is, a plot twist isn't a book. A plot twist isn't a plot. And so what I have to work backwards from is, well, you have a cool twist, but what are you gonna build around that? How are you gonna build up to it so that plot twist lands and is fun and exciting? What is the book that supports this kind of cool motive? So from there, I do go, okay, I know the why, so what's the who? And from there, I do develop the killer, but you kind of can't have a killer without a victim. So killer and victim emerge at the same time, my who's. And alongside this, I start to think about my main character, who is my investigator. And they'll crystallize in kind of different pieces. So for the Ivies, the first thriller I did that I was vlogging, the narrator who was very, very clear to me, and the victim who was also very clear to me because the victim who was baked into the core premise of the book. But the killer who wasn't 100% obvious to start. Very different on this second thriller, which we'll refer to in shorthand as my coastal noir. Though that's almost getting ahead of myself because I didn't even have that piece when I started. But I actually had the killer who because the killer who was part of the motive twist. But I didn't know victims. I didn't know how the murders would work into a plot. because this one I'm gonna have more than one murder. The Ivies only had one main death. So with this one, I had a who and a why at the same time. The motive is the who, or the motive is intrinsically tied to the who. So I did have that, but victim, don't know. And main character, I also kind of had that as well because it was also tied in to the motive and that who, but I knew nothing about anything. I didn't know, other than a basic premise, who that main character is, who that investigator character is, the POV character, and even didn't know too much about my murderer. But more importantly, a third act twist is not a plot. And I kind of sat on it for 3-4 months, just really not sure what the driving plot could be that would lead me to this big third act twist. And it's just a third act twist. I will say with the Ivies, I had the third act climax, the actual set piece in my mind super early on. And that's kind of what unlocked most of the book for me. But with the Coastal Noir, I only had a twist, not even an image of like where this reveal would happen and what the kind of conflict and stakes of that scene would be. So knowing essentially what the third act twist is, I go all the way back to the beginning, to Act 1. I have a who, an investigator who, a main character. But the question is, what are they actually going to be doing? The thing with a suspense, a mystery, a thriller is there's always going to be some kind of investigative portion to the story. That's the promise of the premise. You expect characters to follow clues and there be red herrings and figure things out and be wrong about things. But going back to the beginning, what takes the longest for me to pinpoint once I have that third act direction in mind is what is the actual thrust of the plot? Because you can go in a lot of different directions with suspense and mystery and thrillers, and there are a lot of different tropes that you can jump into. So with the Ivies, it was a little bit easier because the motive and the twist was intrinsically tied and baked into the general premise, which gave me a pretty clear plot direction. Like I knew who needed to die, why, and when, and what it would kick off. But with this new book, I had a lot of choices. I'm doing small town secrets, and you can go in a lot of different directions with small town secrets, where essentially the twist should hopefully be a really good payoff, but the twist is almost secondary to the plot. The plot has to be just as juicy as the twist, and it has to stand on its own in a way that wasn't the case with the Ivies. And what was big for me was then the why, but the why that attaches to my investigator character. Why would this character start investigating something that would lead them all the way down the road to this big twist? Sometimes it's just about testing different ideas. So I debated not having someone die, have her just kind of show up and become intrigued about a murder in the past. That's the small town secrets trope. I love it. Or I knew the other option was new murder. New murder kicking off an investigation that leads to old murder secrets. And ultimately that's what I decided to do. There are of course other trope options, but I was between the two of those. And honestly, I went for the one that was going to be more active and exciting. And the last thing that I have to figure out before I start, but now I'm basically doing backwards because I'm starting with a third act twist, is what I call the special sauce of the book. That's the pitchable special sauce. For me, I don't have a book until I have that pitchable special sauce. And that pitchable thing shouldn't be a spoiler. Now, in talking to my friends about the book, I have been full on spoiling that. I've been like, I'm too delighted by my twist. Can I just tell you what it is? But at a certain point, you have to stop doing that because the special sauce, the main thrust of your plot should be enough. And for me, what unlocked it, in the case, really both books. With the Ivies, it was deciding to go with boarding school. And I arrived at that setting option because I was thinking of all of the elements that I wanted to have in the book and what would best enable plotty things to happen. Same thing here. I knew that I needed a character to move from one place to another, and I knew I wanted to have small town secret, so the small town, but you have so many choices for where you want to move a character. And this is where real life inspiration can have all sorts of really interesting repercussions. Basically, I recently read a really interesting article about a real world thing, and I just had a spark moment of, what if I took this cool real life thing, and incorporated it into the story. I don't want to talk too much about it yet because it's still in development, but that was the spark for me. That was the special sauce, because all of a sudden I have this intricate thing that has to do with politics, small towns, class, which enables me to just give a lot of specificity to both the setting, but also to the character conflicts. And that one decision led me down the road of, okay, well, what's the timing of when this story takes place? And that timing snapped another piece into place. And all of a sudden I can see the roadmap of Act 1. I've always needed a roadmap of Act 1 before I start. I need to know several critical scenes that lead up to an inciting incident before I can start writing. And I need those plus either a midpoint turn or a third act twist. With my previous books, I had a midpoint turn but not a third act twist. And that's what's so fascinating for me about the mystery thrillers. I have third act twists but not a midpoint turn before I start. But it's enough. So I figure out a series of set pieces that lead up to the inciting incident, and that's enough for me to get the first 10,000 words of the book out, usually, with a bit falling after the inciting incident very often. After that, it's usually not too hard for me to pants from the inciting incident up to Act 2. I can honestly usually get a little bit ways into Act 2 just purely from pantsing. But what I did on the Ivies that I'm going to do again here, because I don't know my midpoint turn. With the Ivies, I thought I knew my midpoint turn and it ended up being something else. In this case, I don't actually know what it's going to be. I have some murky, vague ideas, but what I'm going to do is when I get to Act 2, I'm going to stop, I'm going to pause, and I am going to roughly outline my Act 2. I actually ended up needing to do that twice on the Ivies. I did a rough roadmap, so like several critical scenes leading up to the midpoint turn, and then I kind of used that very loose outline to keep me on track as I got into the middle. And then once I hit the middle, and it became really, really hard, because middles are where I really start to doubt myself. Middles are where I'm likely to start hating the writing, second guess every choice I've made, and second guess whether this book is a flaming pile of garbage and why did I even decide to write it. And so stopping whenever I need to do micro outlines in Act 2 really worked well for me on the Ivies, and I'm gonna do it again on the Coastal Noir book. So once I've done the midpoint turn, I'll probably stop again to do a rough mini outline, potentially changing something I had come up with before, but do that rough outline, hopefully all the way up to my third act climax. I did come up with my third act climax because once I figured out the setting and the murder that's going to kick off in Act 1, that really unlocked for me what that third act climax set piece can be leading into that big twist. Something about when I do those pauses to do more outlining in Act 2, just in terms of process, usually what it really is asking myself a ton of questions, or asking my character questions, saying to myself, what questions should my character be asking during this section of the book? What curiosity should they have based on what I've revealed so far? And how can I bring up those questions, answer those questions, and do reversals on some of that information? So sometimes that rough outline really just comes from a bullet point list of questions that should be coming up for the main character because the reader is going to be asking them, and then coming up with those specific set pieces, the scenes that can facilitate those questions and those answers. And so it just becomes a string. It's like character interviews friend, cop shows up to up tension, finding a clue. It can start as very vague and then get more specific. Either I figure it out when I sit down to do it, that's where the pantsing never dies, or it's more specific because I have a visual in my head of, oh, they go to a coffee shop to meet with this suspect. Whether it's vague or whether it's specific, taking enough pauses during the second act to really think about those questions and answers and reversals, that is how I breadcrumb myself through Act 2. Act 3 typically, honestly, super easy to write. Not only because before I started I knew what my third act climax set piece was and I'm writing toward it, but I'm usually most excited to write that part of the book. So essentially I'm drafting up to the funnest part, the part I wanted to write from the beginning. And I think that's what's so interesting about me basically starting at the end when I'm coming up with these books. Having a firm destination in mind is really helping me because then I can work backwards from that destination to give it a plot from the start. There's less revision because I'm setting the plot ahead of time. And of course you're all going, this is why you should outline, or why you should plot ahead of time. And you know what? On thriller, suspense, mysteries, I completely agree. I'm liking having this destination, this direction ahead of time, but I still have zero regrets about the books where that hasn't been my process. Like with The Stars We Steal, I simply would have never come up with the Bachelor plotline if I tried to come up with it ahead of time. But this is just such an interesting evolution in my writing process because for all I know, maybe this will impact books I write in the future. Writing thrillers, which have to be intricately plotted or as intricately plotted as possible beforehand, maybe it is going to help me the next time I sit down to write a fantasy or a sci-fi. Ultimately, my takeaway, my lesson here for myself is that every book really is different and it's actually fun exploring a new process. I had fun writing the Ivies. I had fun vlogging it and telling everyone about it. And I'm already so jazzed about this new book just because the discovery process of the last week has been amazing. I'm filming this on a Sunday. You're not gonna see it for a few weeks probably, but I'm filming it on a Sunday. And let me tell you, last Sunday, I had no idea what I was gonna write next. I was actually angsting about it. I was chatting with a writer friend who told me to chill out and calm down. I didn't have to start writing a new book right away, but I wanted to have something to focus on while my agent was reading my revisions. And I was really bummed that I had this great twist and no plot, that I didn't know what the book was. And it was as simple as the next day, Monday night, it was 1 o'clock in the morning and a first line came to me. And so often first lines unlock books for me. I know this isn't the case for everyone, but this is for me. And that first line, an establishment of tone and in many ways character, the ideas just started coming to me rapid fire. I got out my phone, I was in Google Docs, and I basically wrote the first 2 pages on my phone, which need to be revised because they're sloppy because I wrote them on my phone. But it just suddenly crystallized my main character specifically and the tone I wanted to go for. And once I knew this is a noir and a bit of a gothic, that's what really helped me figuring out setting, the choices I would make with the small town secrets, knowing I was going noir gothic. It's like, well, clearly there needs to be another murder. And it just, I don't know. Creativity is such a weird process. Even just trying to explain it to you, this is a new writing process for me, and yet I can't really tell you what to do. I can only tell you that I can tell I have a new writing process for thrillers, and I'm really enjoying it. I should say one thing that really hasn't changed about my writing process. I still get to about the 85 to 90% point of the book. So after the 3rd act climax, but before all of the wrap up stuff, kind of the denouement and wrapping up the story, I still go back to the beginning and start editing. I do my continuity pass and then I finish the book. This works partly because I'm refreshing myself on my emotional arc as well as all of my loose threads. And then it usually makes it really easy to finally finish the book. I bang out the last 5 to 10K because I've already done essentially my first revision pass on the book. I did do that on the Ivies and it helped a lot. So I don't anticipate myself changing because that really works for me. But what I always disclaim when I talk about that aspect of my writing process, you need to be far enough into the book that you're not going to stall and give up on it. So I don't recommend going back to the beginning and starting a revision pass if you've only gotten to the 50% point in the book or even the 70% mark. I personally think getting through that big 3rd act climax scene is critical because it should all roll downhill from there. But if you stop and go back to nitpick and edit before that, you risk stalling, getting it up in your own head and stalling on the book. So that's it. That is my new writing process, or really just me rambling about my new book and how writing the last one has informed how I'm going to approach this one. But I think it's especially interesting because I am such a vocal pantser, but this is an evolution in my writing process and I think it's really, really interesting. I don't think I'm ever going to become a die-hard outliner, but starting with the end and then working backwards from that is really working out for me. Let me know down below in the comments, does this sound like your writing process? Has your writing process evolved book to book? Have you had aha moments that have totally changed how you write? And give this video a thumbs up if you like it. I will continue to do just little windows into my writing process. If it changes again, I will let you know. Well, changes, evolves. This is all about evolution. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.